Hello, nice to see you all. I'm Radek Zaleski, a partner at Netguru, and with me is Ido Lustig. Hello, Ido. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. Hey, Radek, thank you for having me today. Hey, everyone. My name is Ido. I've been very active within the risk industry for the past 15 years, taking leading roles at companies such as PayPal, Checkout.com, the US-based digital bank Bluevine, and similar companies in various roles, chief risk officer, data-related roles, ML, etc.
Thanks for giving us your background. I am talking to you from a beautiful beach in Croatia, so you might see some trees around me and hear some noises. Hopefully that's fine with you. And of course, there is a risk I will lose my connection in a moment. You never know. And talking about the risks, we had this prep call between this podcast before, and I've talked that whenever I hear AI, I hear risks, like the risk of me losing my job, the risk of disruption, the risk of that, the risk of this. And you are chief risk officer, like a senior executive. How do you perceive AI, and what's your views on it?
Oh, that's a broad question. Let's tackle it one by one. So,
Let's go.
to start with, technology, people have always been afraid of technology, while it represents opportunities. If you know, I'm sure you do, when trains were introduced, people were afraid that exceeding 20 kilometers per hour using trains would, harm people. Then people thought that I don't know, relationships would end with mobile phones, and then with smartphones, etc., etc. So technology is a huge asset that, if we use wisely, we can all benefit from very, very much. It also represents risks like any other thing in the world. So it all depends on your approach.
Right, but this is, like, I'm sorry to say that, but my question maybe was a wishy-washy, but your answer was also not very concrete. And I, I am, what I want to hear maybe is like, whenever you're chief risk officer and you read all those, let's say, mainstream media, in New York Times and similar, you listen to mainstream podcasts, but on the other hand, you see what those, especially generative AI LLMs, are capable of doing, and both, that can be a threat from the outside, but also it can be a threat from internally by leaking some information or whatnot. So how, in an exact way, do you perceive AI as a risk? Like, did those new LLMs change the way you work, or the new policies were
Mhm.
introduced, or
Yes.
things are totally different right now? What's the daily work?
So let's separate the answer to two parts. First, I'll tackle dealing with fraudsters and outside threats, and then I'll talk about how do we manage threats internally
Okay.
with data leakage and privacy and many other things. Of course, AI is a threat and a risk. Why? Because it is available to any player that is out there, and as much as we can leverage it to good use, some bad actors can leverage it for bad use. So it's a threat. But also, again, also Google spreadsheets were a threat, allowing fraudsters to create multiple identities using some very basic, formulas or macros. And we've
Yeah.
we've tackled and handled that. Same with AI, even though it's much more powerful. And of course, with generative AI, it's even worse. But that's okay, because that's part of life. There are always threats, and the way we handle them is to be better than the threat, to use all technology means that are available to us, to use data that we have, that companies have, while adhering to privacy laws and regulations and everything, of course. And by leveraging those data points and by leveraging AI, which is at the end of the day, right, machine learning, it can be very
Yeah.
advanced machine learning, it can be very, very advanced statistical models, but
Yeah.
it's machine to begin and end with. And as we leverage technology, we can fight fraudsters. I'll give you a few examples. Fraudsters can
Yeah.
now use AI to replace images, to create videos of people that are not these people, to do
Right.
deepfakes. How do you identify those deepfakes? By using AI that is trained to identify deepfakes. How do you identify stolen identities or synthetic identities? By leveraging AI and machine learning to identify those. So it's a threat and an opportunity. Um,
Right.
so that
Right.
uh, yeah, sorry.
So I have a question around this. So what you're trying to tell me right now is that, of course, the generative AI will be able on a much bigger scales to, for example, to create frauds by creating fake or copycat identities, and this is honestly something that makes me really, really, really frightened. For example, that someone will steal my voice, my face, and use it against my parents. This is something that the possibility of this is frightening, especially for more vulnerable demographics. But what you're saying is that there are already being built systems or systems are rolled out on the production that are able to spot such things. Correct? Is it happening already?
Yes, that is correct. Even though when it comes to phishing or social engineering, which you just referred to, that has always been very hard for
Yeah.
the risk industry to deal with, because when you receive this text message from the Nigerian prince saying that you just won the lottery, most of us will ignore it because it's quite obvious that no one has won the lottery in Nigeria. But when I get, as a risk person, text messages from the local post office saying that I have a package that's just arrived,
Hmm.
and we all receive so many packages, and I just need to click this link in order to send it my way. I always have a hard time not clicking because I have
Of
packages that
course.
I've been waiting for.
Of course.
Not to mention, as you said, your parents or people that are not that used to technology, etc., etc. So combating social engineering is very, very hard. With that said, we can harness technology and AI and machine learning to identify patterns that do not make sense, and to maybe send transactions to further review or to
Right.
trigger additional verification means when we suspect things are not the way they should be.
Right. Because the other thing with the generative AI, what I've heard from my some of my colleagues is that and dealing with security risk issues is that, as you've mentioned, the weakest link is the human, and it's pretty easy to trick human into doing something that is not secure against their will. But systems can spot those behaviors that don't match patterns that you've described, right? But also, what I've heard about generative AI, which made me really think, is that in the past, when you wanted to do such things, you had to be pretty much skilled actor, like let's call it professional hacker. You had to understand scripts, you had to understand the tool set. The tool set was not publicly available. And what some of my friends are telling me right now, that if you're a script kiddie and using top end LLMs for your advantage, you can create very good scripts and very good scenarios for social engineering, and then hijacking the devices of someone. And they explain me, for example, that maybe not right now, but in the past, you could type down like, imagine you're a hacker, you want to convince this person to do this and that, give me some ideas, and then create a code that will hack this WordPress page. And they told me that the the worst part of this is that everyone can be more proficient at hacking and social engineering. Is that true in your opinion? Do you agree with this assumption?
Yes, I do. But there is an asterisk there. So first of all, anyone can use generative AI and ChatGPT, and we all know these days to create to generate code, and that's great. And we can all use generative AI to create text that would seem appealing, that will not have typos, that will not have grammar mistakes. These all are very important. And AI now allows people to do that much more easily. And that's true. Any teenager can leverage that. With that said, in order to do things in a way that is really, really good, you need to be a professional because you don't know
Mm-hmm.
what you don't know. We know that, right? We all have life experience. You enter this new field, you think you know everything, and then you realize that there are so many things that you just overlooked because you didn't know that you had to look at. So it's not that tomorrow any kid can hack anyone. That's not true. It is true that today it is easier for fraudsters to create social engineering messages or to create social engineering scripts for phone calls and so on. But it is also easier for law enforcement and for
Mm-hmm.
risk teams to identify these because we also use technology. And if we stop using technology, then we'd be that would be a very bad day. But we do use technology, so that's okay.
So my fingers crossed are that this, let's say, um, arms race between bad actors and the good people is happening well for the good guys, but maybe we don't hear about that as much in the news, and maybe on purpose. That's my that's my hope, that we hear more about the bad actors and hacking than the good policing. I want to go back to this question around how it's proliferation of generative AI a risk for organizations, not because of the bad actors, but rather because of the new behaviors. People, putting data into those systems, or say, outsourcing work to such systems, or whatever risks there might be. What are the trends? What are you seeing, and how organizations should be prepared for?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, it all starts with data, right? So AI is the technology that uses data in large scales of data in order to make smart decisions, if you will. So data and privacy are key here, and this is not new. It has been around for years now, at least 10 years. That the entire industry understands that privacy matters. Privacy starts with the type of data that you collect and how you store it, how you encrypt it, how you hash it, what you do not keep, how you allow people to remove themselves from databases, etc., etc. So that's something that has been around for years now, and it is not necessarily related to AI. That's a big risk that companies need to manage. And I think most companies, at least legit companies, big companies, manage data very nicely. You hear less and less of huge data breaches. And if you do hear about these, the type of data that is being stolen or breached is different than what we used to see. We used to see full names and credit card numbers and nothing
Yeah,
hashed
yeah.
being released, and nowadays it is less and less common. So that's one. Another very big risk that you mentioned is bias and risks that come with model training and what data you feed into the model, what
Hmm.
outcome do you get from the model. And I want to say two things. One, I think the element that is most biased today is not machines, but is
Hmm.
it's humans. We all know that people are very, very prone to bias, gender bias, race
Yeah.
bias, age bias, all of these biases. With ML and AI, all you have to do is make sure that you do not feed the model with data you don't want the model to be trained on. It's not that easy because AI can use some elements to make broader generalizations that actually do have bias. And I'll give you an
Mm-hmm.
example.
Yeah.
You don't use race when you train models. Of course, you don't use race. No one does. But there is a correlation between zip codes and where people
Yeah.
live and race, right? And you do maybe use zip codes when you train your model, and then the model
Right.
becomes biased. This is why
I,
companies nowadays test their models against different types of bias. So you need to have a model governance policy within your organization. And before deploying any model to production and before using any model, you need to make sure that A, the data that it used was the right data, and B, that there is no hidden bias that was created as part of the
right.
training
Now,
process.
now, now,
That's
now I
very important.
understand this. Now I understand. So let me try to explain it into my to myself and to my simple mind. So, say I have a huge database of past interactions with a market, and I have this idea, and as an executive, I will just dump it to generative AI to see some patterns. And I do it, and I get some patterns, and it guides me, it gives me tips, it changes my strategy. Because of that, I impose this strategy onto the company, and we roll, and everything is great. But what do I not know is this initial database that I dumped had this flaw of being biased. For example, it because of the data, it thought that certain types of interactions were better than the others, whatever. And because of that, my whole strategy is right now flawed, or maybe biased, and maybe I'm missing
Mhm.
something. And because there was no governance around this, I might not know it. Right? This is what you're trying to
Exactly.
explain.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. I can give you an example. There have been accusations. I'm not sure they are true, but there have been accusations, and anyone can find this online, against Google and Google
Yeah.
Images, that the ability of the Google engine to identify non-white, non-men individuals is much weaker than white men. Why? Because of the training set that was used that was skewed towards white men. So that has
Uh huh.
created some bias within the system. I'm sure no one intended to do
Yeah.
that, but that was the
Yeah.
outcome. And you need to check yourself. You need to have a very long list of all the biases and all the things that you want to make sure you do not discriminate against, and check, is the score of the model. Let's talk about risk and maybe credit, right? It's easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Credit. With credit, you have probability of default. That's the basic model that any statistician has been building for the past, I don't know, 40, 50 years,
Yeah.
that tries to predict the probability of someone defaulting on their credit or on their loan. Um, you want to make sure that with every new generation of the model that you deploy or develop, the score distribution is very, very similar between men and women, between different types of races, between different geographies, between different states, and every time you see a discrepancy, you need to be able to explain it to yourself and to document it very, very well. Because otherwise, you're at the risk of doing things that are A, not illegal, and B, not right, or maybe vice versa. Let's start with not right, and then talk about the law.
Yeah. So, uh, sorry, I've lost the last sentence. Could you repeat the last sentence?
I just said that we need to do things that are right, and then make sure that they are
Uh,
within the boundaries of the law, of course.
right, because that's my another question. So when I was hearing you, is it sounds pretty easy, about this governance, about the quality of the data, but the question is, who watches the Watchmen? So I assume kind of that you are the watchman, the person that is responsible for making sure that those things work well. But how do you know that you are not biased by some data inputs or some AI algorithms that someone created before you? That's one question. And the other question is, can you reverse engineer it somehow? So say,
Okay.
see if some outputs were created because of not great data sets, or uh, poorly implemented AI systems?
Okay, so yes, you can test it, and you have to test it, and you have to have a very long checklist of things you want to check before you deploy a model. You can also deploy a control group, and for a percentage of the population, let the model run, but you don't use the model score or outcome or output in order to make a decision because it's a control group, and then you can really see if different scores behave in different ways with different populations, etc. You always have to do that, and you must have very clear guidelines that are created within the organization in order to make sure that you do that. Also, there is this very known risk framework, which is called
Mm-hmm.
three lines of defense. It has nothing to do with AI. It talks about
Yep.
how you have three lines within the organization. First line is the people that make actual decisions. Second line is the people that come up with policies and guidelines for those people and make sure audit the first line and make sure that they behave within the boundaries that were set. And then there is a third line, and that's the internal audit committee or team that makes sure that everyone does everything they are supposed to and that nothing was missed, so that the
Mm-hmm.
policies that the second line came up with are the right ones, etc., etc. Use that lines of defense model, import it into the ML AI world, and make sure that when you deploy models, you do it the right way, you do it with the proper controls, that you audit yourself, that you do everything that we mentioned. So that's very important. Another point you touched upon was explainability and reverse engineering.
Yeah.
And that's a tough one.
Right.
That's a tough one. With
Yeah. This is
linear
so,
regression.
sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry to interrupt. Let me just explain to maybe less technical people. So let's say in traditional software development and traditional software reasoning, you could always do reverse engineering by doing backtracking and seeing like what happened because of other things that happened before, and track the issue hopefully to the root. With LLMs, with generative AI, it is not that simple, as we do not know exactly how those models work. They are so-called black box. We know that we put some data in, some data comes out, but what happens in between, it is not that easy to ask the system, hey, could you guide me through why did you came up with this idea, right? So that is why my
exactly.
question.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And that creates two problems. One, um, when we talk about risk and credit, for instance, there is always regulation around reasoning. You cannot just say no to someone, you need to explain. And if you base your decision on AI, advanced AI, then it's going to be very hard for you to do so. And also, if you have a bug or if something doesn't work, or if you see that there is a bias and you want to fix it, you need to know where it all started, and you need to have the ability to reverse engineer. This has been a known problem for a few years now. There have been talks around XAI, explainable AI, and there are a
Yeah.
few companies, some of which are promising companies, that try to leverage AI and into building explainable AI models. And the way they do it is
Interesting.
they take the parameters that were fed into the model to make a specific decision, and they start fine tuning and slightly changing each parameter at a time. And they run maybe thousands of such tests or hundreds of thousands of such tests if you have many data points that feed into the model. And then they have an ability using statistical models and AI to understand which of the parameters contributed the most to the decision, and you get an explanation. And if you see that there is
Okay.
bias against
Interesting.
men or against women in some scores, you start feeding things into the model, and then you realize, hey, this is all based on, I don't know, a question around. And sorry for saying things that are so superficial. What's your favorite color? And if people say more purple or pink, then the model understands that they are women, or at least girls, or at least my girl, etc., etc. So we can take that out of the model, and we can make sure that we don't use it anymore. Okay, so that's the challenge of explainable AI and explainability, and this is how
Yeah.
it has been tackled.
Um, so thank you for explanation. I have my doubts regarding this, knowing how LLMs work. But let's see what future will bring. Right, my personal um, maybe not a risk assessment, but rather how do I not trust those generative AI systems is precisely that I cannot reason with them sometimes. Right, I cannot understand why some things happened and why the others did not happen, and you might get some predictive analysis maybe based on the previous actions, but it's still not fully defined as in traditional software. But maybe it's because I'm old and so used to traditional
Yeah,
databases.
I think it has to do with the fact that the generative AI industry is quite young, and any challenge is a good challenge, and it needs to
Okay.
mature. The industry needs to mature, and in 10 years we'll have very good ways to explain our generative AI models. What will happen in 10 years is that there's going to be a new technology.
uh,
Yeah, and then there'll be more challenges. But that's life, right? That's what makes life interesting. Otherwise, it would have been
yeah,
super boring to just, be successful and, I don't know,
right.
go to vacations in Croatia.
So we have around 5 minutes left. I will ask a super dumb question, but hopefully it will be helpful for other people who are running their businesses or making decisions. What are the most obnoxious mistakes organizations are doing right now with AI, generative AI, but those mistakes are not well described in the media or are not well known? So basically, what people are doing like a huge mistake, but they do not know it. So they might not learn something from you right now.
Oh, that's a nice question. I think the first mistake is not to use AI or generative AI or the tools that are available out there. Many companies fear that, and they don't want people to use external tools. There are good reasons for not having people use external tools, but we talked about the arms race. If you want to be ahead of your competition, or if you want to be ahead of bad actors, you always have to use technology because they use that technology.
Yeah.
And if you don't, you're behind. So I think that's the biggest mistake. Another mistake is to think, talking about the teenager using technology, to think that you don't need people who really deeply understand machine learning and data science and data engineering technology in order to harness AI. You do need them, because if you want to do, if you want to deploy models that are really good and not just okay, you need to have the right people on board. Maybe um, 10 years from now that will not be the case, and then there'll be other jobs that will be created. You asked a question at the beginning about job security.
Yeah.
I think with every new technology that is being introduced, there are fears that people will lose jobs. That'll happen, but there will be other types of jobs that will be created thanks to the technology. So I'm an optimistic. I hope that things will improve for the better versus for the worse, but I don't think that any technology will create this unemployment crisis that no one
Hmm.
has seen before, because machines will replace us all. If anything, there is a risk that
Yeah.
machines will just nuke us, like we've all seen Terminator and the Judgment Day scene. So that's a larger risk to me than the ones that than the one that people will lose jobs.
Okay, great, great. So I will try to recap your advice on the biggest mistakes, which is basically the biggest mistake is not to invest into the AI and the right people. And the biggest mistake is to be too much of, be afraid versus be an optimist, which is a very, very good message, I guess, for all of us. If chief risk officer for top, financial services companies around the globe says we should be optimists about the AI.
Yeah. I'm very much an optimistic, so yeah, I could not agree more with that.
Great, thank you very much. It was a lovely conversation. Ido, thank you for all the smart things that you've shared with us, and let's hope for two things: that this bright future with AI, but this is your hope and my hope that we will be able to debug it and see the reason behind it. That's my own personal wish. And thank you very much, and see you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Radek. Bye. Take care. Enjoy your time.
Thank you.